In the early 2000s, the world of online games was still a frontier, wild, unmoderated, and full of loopholes waiting to be exploited. It was here in EverQuest's most brutal player versus player server, Salonzek, that one low-level bard discovered such a loophole. A technicality in the rules. Armed with nothing but a lute, his voice, and a complete disregard for consequences, he brought high-level monsters to the gate of the evil team's cities and watched the chaos unfold. This is the story of how one player, too low level to be attacked, became too dangerous to be ignored. This is the tale of Fansy the Famous Bard. EverQuest is the founder of most Western MMOs to this day. Of course, there were other games like Ultima Online that would inspire games like Elder Scrolls, but EverQuest was more like the founder to World of Warcraft in adapting the mechanics from Dungeons & Dragons into a massively multiplayer online game. Over time, expansions released which streamlined the game and made it more accessible to casual gamers, but in the original release of EverQuest, the game was merciless. You would die right out of the gate. There was an abundance of deadly enemies everywhere and there was no protection from them. Loot and rewards went entirely to whomever did 51% of the damage, and it took a long time to level. All of this was to encourage group play, and unlike modern MMOs these days which use leveling as a gateway to endgame content, EverQuest's leveling itself was meant to be a large part of the journey, similar to WoW Classic. Taking inspiration from Dungeons & Dragons' alignment chart, the game allows you to pick a side of good or evil, and amongst your standard RPG classes like barbarians, druids, clerics, and many others, there existed bards. Bards were the jack of all trades. Every class could do their specific job better than a bard, but bards were the only class that could do everything. They could direct magic damage, damage over time, buffs, melee, ranged, literally everything. And most importantly for this story, bards could charm, letting them control NPCs and hostile mobs. And you'll see why this is so important very shortly. Introducing Fansy. Fansy was a bard almost fresh out of class selection, barely above level 1 on a no-rules server. No-rules servers is exactly what it sounds like. Pretty much anything goes. But of course, nothing online is ever truly rule-free, and so ironically, there were two rules. 1. No disrupting the server itself. This includes DDoS attacks, cheating, hacking, and many other forms. And 2. No PvP before level 6. This latter rule was actually flagged in the server, and so players below level 6 couldn't be damaged by other players. This was because players below level 6 were almost always still doing the tutorial. However, these two rules would be enough to take the whole server down. Now, Fansy was a level 5 bard, and as a level 5, there wasn't much you could do. As Fansy explored the world, everywhere he went he encountered the sort of players you would expect on a no-rules server. Those who shouted slurs and insults at everyone around them, those who gang up to bully people lower level than them, and many others like them. And naturally, almost all of them, from around 80 to 90% of the entire server, was evil. Fansy, having chosen the good side, saw this and wept at the sight of many bad guys all around the server, and he decided to do something about it. Something that was only available to him, even as a measly level 5 bard utilizing the only tool he had in his kit, a minor speed buff called Celos Acceleration. As a level 5, Fansy couldn't hurt anyone else, and his speed buff was so minor that it wouldn't be much use in PvP anyways, but it did make him faster than one thing: sand giants. See, in EverQuest, enemies don't have a threat response limit. In most modern games, once you aggro a mob, after disengaging with them for a few seconds, they will stop chasing you and reset. This was not the case in EverQuest though, meaning that if you aggro a monster, it will never stop chasing you until the entire zone deactivates from all the players leaving it. And this was the key to Fansy's cleanse. Sand giants as a mob weren't very fast, so it was relatively easy to stay ahead of them, even more so with the speed buff. Fansy took full advantage of his limited abilities. He wandered around the Oasis of Ma, a large desert in the middle of the Desert of Ro, gathering behind him a train of every single sand giant he could find, whilst roleplaying himself as a shining beacon of good, smiting the forces of evil on this no-rules land. A singular sand giant was anywhere from level 30 to 37 and could take several players working together to take down. And Fansy was kiting dozens of them. A common phrase back then was train to zone. In EverQuest, training referred to the act of luring a group of hostile mobs behind you like a train and leading them somewhere else, typically to other players or a zone entrance. In the case of Fansy the Bard, this phrase was yelled across the entire zone every time he was online. Every group of bad guys, as he called them, were killed by the trailing sand giants as he ran around the map. And as a level 5, the other players couldn't damage him. Dying was no joke in the early days of EverQuest. Though not quite as punishing as hardcore WoW where you lose your character, you would still lose all of your possessions and you would have to run back to retrieve it from the town you spawned in. Most notably of all, you would have to do this without any equipment, being completely unarmed. Fansy would continue to do this, obliterating dozens of players, and then again when they came back to collect their possessions. The bad guys called him all manners of uncouth slurs, but were powerless to stop him. He did this for days on end, and eventually players who were afraid would flee in terror when he logged on, and the ones which remained behaved themselves out of fear that he would collect the sand giants. It had been a couple of days since he started doing this when Fansy came across his first friend, a good monk by the name of Yamaduta. They met when Yamaduta asked Fansy for his speed buff since he needed to run to another city to store an item. Of course, Fansy, as a good guy, obliged. While they were traveling together on the sands of the oasis, Fansy noticed a group of evil players on their trail. Fansy was level 5, so he was protected by rule number 2 of the server, but Yamaduta was a higher level. And so the evil players targeted Yamaduta and killed him. They laughed at Fansy as he grieved over his friend's death. It was time for revenge, and so Fansy called in the giants. With no way to fight back, the evil group ran and on their way encountered a lockjaw mob meeting their demise. Infuriated, they had an idea. What if they sent their own evil bard to run a counter train against Fansy? Players couldn't damage him, true, but mobs could, and so they sent a level 29 bard to pick up sand giants in order to counter train Fansy. But alas, this was to no avail. As the two trains clashed, one was clearly victorious. With an overwhelming 7 giants to the evil bot's 3 giants, Fansy stood victorious, successfully avenging his friend. Countless players reported Fansy and bugged admins of the server to ban him or somehow stop his tactics. But remember, this is a no-rules server, and so the admins okayed his behavior. Eventually, however, enough players complained that an admin gave Fansy a warning that he was disrupting the server with his behavior. At this point in time, Fansy's account was one warning away from being banned, and so he stopped. The no-rule server had made a special rule for Fansy. And a few days later, rule number 2 of the server was changed. We will be removing the below level 6 PvP immunity in mid to high level adventure zones. This will be done to prevent players below level 6 from causing grief without the higher level players having a means to retaliate. And this would mark the end of Fansy the famous bard. Not really. EverQuest released its expansion Shadows of Lucin in early December 2001, and 5 months after this expansion's release, he returned. No longer level 5, but now with the ability to chump single target NPCs, he no longer depended on his PvP immunity to drive bad guys out of Norath. Fansy came back to find things worse than ever. What few guys remained when he was previously playing had given up, and it had returned to the state it was in before. And so, he got to work. The Priest of Discord is an NPC that is in every city in the game, and his job was to flag players for PvP. After Fansy's return to the server, no one believed it was really him. Apart from the usual slurs that he was used to being called, others started to call him a faker and an imposter. And so he went to the town of Rivervale, a town where neutral alignment characters can spawn only to find it full of people who were toxic to him. Naturally, this put them into Fansy's bad guy category, regardless of whether they were evil or not. After being refused entry into the town, he came up with a devious plan. Fansy decided to ask the local Priest of Discord for some help. He charmed a low-level NPC that was flagged to be an ally with the priest and ordered them to attack. Since the NPC and priest were allies, the priest joined in and proceeded to murder everyone in the town of Rivervale, whilst shouting role-playing lines like "you fool" and "let this fool's meaningless death be a reminder to you all that the power of Discord is absolute." The evil bad guys couldn't understand it. They couldn't understand why Fansy was going around beating up people who were calling him slurs because he got no experience or loot from their deaths. As this massacre continued, they continued to hurtle insults at him even as Doomsday came around the block. They continued to make empty threats of killing Fansy and camping his corpse until one of them finally had enough and contacted a GM, Storm. They came in and explained that they had a problem with Fansy's behavior. Storm explained that it wasn't fair to use the guards, but Fansy retaliated, saying that he never read a rule like that. And as such, Storm engaged in PvP and killed Fansy. Once again, another rule was made for the singular bard. And so Fansy's journey ended. He stopped the fight against the bad guys lest he be banned from the server. But let his story be a tribute, a reminder to all that even the weakest of characters can demolish anyone with clever tactics. This was the tale of Fansy, the famous bard. Thank you for watching.